Hey team, Professor Travis here, and in today's video I want to talk about why consistency is more important than intensity, both in jiu-jitsu and in the acquisition of any other skill. So we'll start with an example. Let's say we have two students, Jim and Adam. Jim comes in consistently 2 to 3 times a week, occasionally 4, but he's always here on the mat. Some days he trains hard, some days he takes a little bit lighter if he's nursing an injury or if he's, just coming back from vacation or something, but he's all the time 2 to 3 times per week. And then we have Adam, who is very inconsistent, but when he comes in, he trains as hard as he possibly can. I mean, he pushes himself, he trains to fatigue, and then when he catches his breath, he goes again, he stays after, he gets some extra rounds in. And many times when we think about like which one's going to get better faster, we might favor the guy who's training the hardest or at least the most intense, which would be Adam. But the consistency of training every week, 2 to 3 times per week, even if not every training session is very arduous, is going to beat that person over time. Maybe in the beginning, that intense mindset with those two people training together, assuming they have natural levels of talent, perhaps the intense training student would get the better of the other one, just overwhelming them with the intensity. But in terms of who's going to develop the most skill, it's going to be the person that is the most consistent. Why is that? Because you're working on your repetition, you're working on your timing, your muscle memory, your confidence as you grow, versus the person who comes in after, missing, 2 to 3 weeks at a time, then comes in maybe, every day of the week, 3, 4, 5 days a week, and just trains as hard as he can. That person, even though we kind of respect and honor someone who works really, really physically hard and pushes themselves, they're not developing skill the same way that the consistent student is. They're usually in a mindset of scarcity and trying to make up for lost time. And on top of that, they're much more likely to burn out by the end of their training session or the end of that week because they've simply overtrained. The risk of injury goes up, the risk of burnout goes up, and even if they feel satisfied with how hard they push themselves, after a few days or a week or so of that level of training, their subconscious mind is going to talk them into taking another break. They're going to say, okay, that was tough. I earned it. I'll take a week off. Maybe I'll even eat some junk food because I burned so many calories. I strained my knee a little bit. My neck is sore. I'm going to take some time off. And then they skip class altogether. Where they could come in if they were sore or had an injury or something like that and just drill the technical part of class, or just train much lighter, or just train with students who want to go more of a flow style training. But that's usually not what happens. What usually happens is just radio silence for 10 to 20 or whatever days until they get the itch again, and then they come back in. And why is this? Because intensity feels productive. When we work really hard, we feel like we crushed it. And there's a lot of stuff online telling young people or especially young men, but just telling everyone like to sacrifice sleep and to push yourself as hard as possible and really like seize the day. Don't waste any minute, get the most that you can out of it. And while that might work for some people, and I'm not against it for those that can keep that pace day after day, year after year, but you have to ask yourself, is that you? And maybe more importantly, is that you right now? Because maybe you'll become that. Maybe you'll become obsessed with acquiring a certain skill. I know when I started doing jiu-jitsu, they only had it at the place that I started like 2 days a week. And I wanted to go all the time. I was so in love with it. By the time I found a school that I could go, every single day, I had already worked up because I was consistently going 2 days a week at the previous school. And so that's usually best to start off with something that leaves you a little bit eager to come back for more. It leaves you wanting to, sort of that, I can't wait till I get to the next class. That was so much fun, and I learned this move and man, I don't really know how to do it. But I'm going to ask questions when I come back to class. I'm going to think about that technique, and I'm going to practice it when I get there. That's a good place to be. Versus, I just had to drag myself off the mat. I was dead, every joint hurt. I was dehydrated and I was exhausted. I could barely get out of bed the next day. Sounds awesome. If you're like a dude, that sounds kind of, badass, but it's not really sustainable. Maybe it will be. Maybe you'll get to the level where you're a competitive athlete, but it's probably not the best way to start out. And basically, this is a mindset that I think you should adopt for anything. If you want to learn an instrument, if you want to learn a new language, it's better to practice a little bit every week than it is to try to cram, 10 hours a day for 2 or 3 days and then hope that that's going to sustain you for the month. It just doesn't work out. Even if you extrapolate out the same number of hours, let's say in a month, a consistent student of jiu-jitsu, let's say they get in 10 hours of practice in the month by coming 2 to 3 days per week. And then another student gets 10 hours of practice in a 2 to 3 day period. They come to the day class, they stay late, they come to the evening, they stay late, they come to another class the next day, and then they're gone the rest of the month. Which one do you think is going to have acquired more skill? It's going to be the consistent student. Another important concept is that consistency builds identity. Okay, the more often you do something and the more consistent you are, the more you will identify with being that person. You won't be someone who trained really hard one day. You'll be someone who trains. You won't be someone who pushes themselves really hard to the point of exhaustion. You will be someone who is an actively practicing martial artist. And that's a very important mindset to be in when you want to become great at anything, is that you become that thing. You become a little bit obsessed with it, but to the point that you are just consistent over time, not that you go crazy and burn yourself out. If you burn out, then you're actually lacking passion, and the intensity of your training is just trying to compensate for something that you haven't been consistent long enough with to build any real confidence with. And so I think it's super important that you start to identify as a person who does the thing you're doing no matter what, right? I'm feeling good today, I'm going to train. I'm having a bad day today, I'm going to train. I'm really busy and I'm distracted with a whole lot of other things, but I still prioritize this part of my life because I am a martial artist, so I'm going to train. I missed a class, it was impossible, I had an emergency, I missed it. I make that class up the next day, or I find another day in the week because I train 2 to 3 or whatever your number is times per week. It needs to become your identity, not I'm a weekend warrior who just crushes it, until the point of exhaustion, and then I leave for 10 days, okay? One is going to produce real, tangible, measurable skill over time, and the other is going to produce burnout and injury. So in closing, no, you do not have to be the hardest working person in the room to become great. Now, over time, if you want to be a competitor, if you want to be a world-class black belt, you have to experience every level of training. The tedious, boring drilling, the high-intensity competitive sparring, and every little part in between that makes for a well-rounded player. But the only way you're going to figure out how to become that and understand the different levels of training, the different ways to train to get better, not just showing up as part of it, but then being curious and asking questions and trying things in a different way and really digging into the technical element of the art. That's only going to happen if you're consistent, right? So you have to be consistent. And then pretty soon you'll start to get into what I call like the geek phase. You'll be like, oh man, I've been working this lasso guard. I've been trying these different variations. I'm getting into it. And you'll want to come more and more. Also very important if you set a goal, like a competition, or just to become very proficient or make it to where no one can pass your guard. You're going to want to come to class. You're going to be excited about the growth that you experience during that time on the mat. and you won't be, blinded by this, man, I've really got to just train until I'm exhausted and dehydrated and broken. That's not how champions train. In fact, a lot of UFC champions, they're very selective with their hard training. They only train with certain people, and they only train, in a way that is very safe. And I know we've heard that's not everybody. I know some of them are just crazy, and you have your standouts. But unless you're that phenom athlete that can just, train 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. I mean, if that's your goal to be the best in the world, then yeah. What those people have going for them is they're both. They're consistent and they train really hard, but that's their entire life, right? If that's you, go for it. Go get what you're worth. Go become the biggest champion you can be. But if you're just trying to be as good as you can be wherever you are in life, then show up as often as you can, consistently over time with few breaks in between, okay? The breaks should be day to day, but not over the course of many weeks. All right. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think. Leave me a comment. Tell me if this lines up with your goals, or maybe if you've ever been the person who was overtraining, and hopefully now you're in a more consistent state with your training and with your goals. Talk to you next time.